Hello. Hi, Alex.
Hi, Jennifer. How are you?
I am so excited about this conversation today. I'd first like to thank Brown Girls Stop Mafia for once again bringing us together. I'm so grateful for this organization and the conversations they inspire. I'm also thankful for the audience who showed up to hear Alex and I's chat today. We will be recording the session, just a heads up. And Alex, thank you so much for taking the time. I know how busy you are. For those of you who don't know about Alex's incredible body of work, I'm going to give you a little bio. Alex is an Emmy Award-winning director and producer known for her thought-provoking projects that have redefined authentic music, pop culture, and social justice. In a career spanning more than 15 years, Stapleton has collaborated with some of the best documentarians in the industry, releasing projects across all the top networks and studios. Yes, she has. Most recently, Stapleton received 2 Primetime Emmy Award nominations for Sean Combs' The Reckoning, and today we are thrilled to have here to discuss this very important conversation around participant care. So please join me in welcoming Alex Stapleton. Yay. Sorry for that little housekeeping. And then lastly, we will not be doing a Q&A just due to the limited time and because we're trying to cover so much in this very small space. We're gonna dive right in. We thought it made sense to start with a little bit of a disclaimer. And what we mean by that is, I think that in these conversations, when my partner and I, Camilla, made subject, I think there was a lot of people who were like, well, there was no answers. There was no just right or wrong. And in talking about these things, this conversation is going to be very similar. We are not by any means we don't know everything there is to know about participant care, but what we can bring to the conversation is a shared experience of 20 plus years and a lot of mistakes and recovering from those mistakes and a lot of learning along the way. And I think we both really deeply believe that these conversations hopefully can inspire, support, and offer some guidance and resources in these really difficult situations that we find ourselves in. And so that's what we're hoping to do today. Alex, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you're doing a fantastic job, and I'm happy to be here, and I'm also very, very, very grateful to everyone attending and to Brown Girls Doc Mafia for hosting conversations like this. It's really, really incredible, and to you.
Well, thank you. I'm going to start at a place which I feel so often gets pushed to the back, not only in our industry and as especially if we're mothers, but I'm going to start with something that even feels a little bit irky for me to bring up, but that is self-care. This idea that we can only love others as much as we love ourselves, and the importance of self-care. I'd love to talk about the importance of self-care when we're working on a project like this, and how you bring self-care into the fold and your process around that.
Yeah, I think self-care is something that I definitely didn't really observe in the beginning, middle, or middle of my career. I feel like I'm very new to that part and embracing it. I guess it's sort of like the adage of, put your oxygen mask on first and then assist those around you. And I think that, when you're making difficult documentary work where the subject matter can be really tough and very challenging, and you're also, your interview subjects are, so you don't have just one person that you're dealing with, but you're sort of building a world of sort of a chorus, of different stories and perspectives. It can quickly become very overwhelming, for a filmmaker to be tasked with that. To also, as a filmmaker, make sure that your crew is okay, and because as directors, we are responsible, for our sets and setting an example for everyone on set to follow. And then you kind of have this added layer of being the communicator to whoever you're reporting to. If that's a streamer with Sean Combs, it was a direct relationship to the executives I had at Netflix. And so you sort of want to be measured and calm, throughout all of that. And making docs, as I'm sure everyone who's listening would probably agree and attest to, they're very difficult to do, to make sometimes, and they can be very isolating experiences. So yes, and yes to self-care. I think that, for each project more recently, that's looked different. Self-care has sort of has been different. I mean, sometimes it boils down to like even the way I schedule things. Just being very practical about like what to put on one day of a schedule. At this place in my career, it's very rare for me to schedule more than one interview in one day, because even if it's not going to be a tough day, it's just it's a lot. You have to change setups, and there's a lot of moving, and I feel like it can be pretty disruptive to both myself and I have ADHD, and so I already have challenges, when I start. So I like to just kind of keep calm, know that like the whole day is going to be spent with one person. It's also easier for my crew. And then that, is also usually easier for the interview subject. So we don't have, oh, we got to wrap this conversation up. We only have 45 minutes before I have to break, to change setups. And so that's like about the day, but it's also about, I think, protecting my brain, so that I can fire off on all cylinders. I'm a big believer in diet and exercise, and that those are things that I totally ignored when I was younger, that I totally 1,000% believe in. The nourishment that your body takes is very key and important. And
I actually find myself scheduling that into my schedules. And like, that's something I never did, but now I put it in there and put it like under appointments.
Yeah, absolutely. I need to get better at it. I'm saying this out loud as I'm like also reminding myself as I'm like in the midst of something right now. But it's basic like that. Listening sometimes more than talking is a really big thing that helps me. And knowing who to communicate with, because beyond like your the sort of physical self, right? There's also like your mental checks and balances, and it's really important to make sure that who you're communicating with, that's a trusted relationship and source, with like producers, for example, that you have a really solid team, or at least one other person, if that's a personal person, or a producer, that kind of just a partner that you can have conversations and be vulnerable, with. Sometimes bringing up things that might be bothering you, or questions that you might have about like how you're gonna, are you even doing too much, like just, I mean, all of the things. And I'm very blessed to have an amazing producing partner that I've had for years, and I feel like we have a safe space for each other. But then I have to also make sure that I'm not over sharing or being an overbearing human to her.
How do you do that? I think like that is actually a big thing that I'm constantly trying to remind myself at, like checking in with those people that I'm putting so much, that are supporting me so much through this. And how do you navigate that?
Sometimes it's just picking up on social cues, understanding, reading, her energy, or others' energy. We've recently at the company, we've started to try to adopt, better hours. And, of course we have days where it's like, there's no sleep till Brooklyn, right? Like we have to, and that's usually, there's sometimes during shooting or when we're about to deliver, especially on The Reckoning. I mean, we didn't sleep we had very long days in post towards the end, but I try to sort of respect other people's hours and to talk about that. And, like, hey, like, you don't have to pick up if I'm texting you, like, we're not always available to each other. And I think in a world where like everyone can email you, everyone can text you, and people are just so contactable at any point, day or night. Me respecting boundaries of others is a really big deal, but then also me putting boundaries in for myself is a really big deal. That sort of went out the window for the reckoning. It was an extraordinary, set of circumstances because things were breaking in real time, and so I didn't necessarily, it's like, hey, I'm off the clock right now because I was sort of always open. So I would try to like find at least one day of the week during the making of the reckoning where I could, okay, maybe I'm working, but I'm like, trying to plug into some things that I know that I need, for my body and spirit. And so, and when you have off time, being really present in that off time, and then I'm also a mom, so it's like another added layer of remembering to for me personally, like I get a lot of joy out of being present for my son, and my son is also a part of my self-care to make me remember, like, at the end of the day, I'm just a mom that goes home to, like my son has needs, and I gotta, he's numero uno. So that's sort of like a very like big answer. And maybe it's a bit obvious, but I think that when I was younger, at least, I just sort of, I would push myself, almost to like collapse, like to a place. And then I just realized, like, you showing up exhausted and tired and like mentally broken it not only hurts yourself, but it's not fair to the interview subjects, and then the participants, and it usually yields like diminishing returns. That's a big thing at House of Nonfiction. We always say when we hit our max, we're like, okay, it's diminishing returns. So like, tomorrow's another day. Let's wake up. We live to fight another day,
I always find how obvious it is, yet we always are striving to keep we still, that's the first thing that's constantly out the window with my partners, with so many other filmmakers I speak to. So that's why I just like to like remind ourselves, maybe we just schedule something or take a breath or, like find that piece. This, to your point, was extraordinary circumstances. It's there is the mental health care of it, right? There's the trauma, there's the abuse. But in addition to that, you are following a trial, which is, if anyone who's ever followed a trial, like there is no peace because you're on somebody else's schedule. And then you layer that with the safety precautions and the safety issues around all this. How did you navigate? Like, that is in so many ways like a trifecta that is very unusual to a certain kind of project. And I would just love to hear some of the things you put in place for your crew around those things.
Well, when we started the series, it was way before the trial. I mean, Sean hadn't even been indicted yet. So, I literally started working the day that Cassie, that her lawsuit went public, and immediately, tried to reach her attorney, her team, and then she settled with Sean the next day. I mean, it was like 24 hours later. And so then the work became like, there's so much more to this story. Like, how do I navigate trying to find, other people that would be willing to talk? And so that was sort of one layer that existed for a very long time. And it was like interesting because depending on what was happening with Sean, it would sort of become easier at points or more difficult to be able to connect with people and for people to feel safe and secure to open up to me. So in the beginning it was sort of chaos, and then Little Rod was, I think, the second really big gigantic civil suit that dropped, and then they just started, like, more and more civil suits started to come out, and at that point I felt like it sort of became, conversations were happening, but then there's also being responsible to vet stories, because there were a lot of people that were filing lawsuits, and we, upon further examination, it's like, oh, these dates don't add up, or this doesn't feel credible, just because of facts that were listed in the civil suits. And so there were a lot of chaos agents as well. So it was really important to sort of approach everyone, to meet them where they were, and then for us to to do our work, my team and myself, to do the work to sort of do the vetting, but while still being very respectful to everyone that we were interfacing with, and then yes, there were safety concerns that eventually added on. I remember at one point, I remember being in New York. I mean, most of this was shot in New York, and just the being in New York, like, like with being, exposed to certain conversations, knowing that there were some bad actors that were floating around and were intimidating people and threatening people. And, there were house visits. I mean, there was all sorts of stuff going on behind closed doors that I was hearing about. And I remember, excuse me, sort of having, like, getting back to my hotel room and just talking out loud to myself, like, do I really want to do this? And I called my producing partner, and I had a conversation with her. I was like, this isn't just, if we do this, it's not just going to, like, this is a big decision, not only for me, but the company, because it was my production company, for the team. Like, we're going to have to assume a lot of responsibility. And she was like, yeah, we're ready. We can do this. And so that sort of, like, we got really grounded, and I think, sort of the real work began. And like you said, it was just a constant weave of, on a day-by-day basis, of figuring out, how does everyone stay safe? How does everyone stay in good spirits? How does everyone rest when we can? And how do we get the story? So that looked a certain way in the field. And then when we got to post, it got crazier. And then when he was arrested, then when the trial started, it sort of, like, took another sort of life of its own.
I find myself breaking these sections, like, very much, we think of it as pre-production, production, post, but really it's kind of like, it's more of the relationships is my timeline, each relationship, and where we are in that relationship, and where we are with the trust building. I'd love to segue now into your process with the participants and what you've thought, like, that beginning impetus of what was most important to you, and those relationships, and what that looked like. You did say this brilliant thing, like, there is no one size fits all. And I think we live in a very gray area, and everyone has different needs. But what was your starting point in that, in those very beginning conversations, in those first steps?
Well, before even communicating with another human being, I take, like, research, like, very, very, very seriously. I try to do as much as I can, and digging up as much as I can about who is it that I'm going to be in conversation with. And I think that that's also, like, sort of like the first step in building trust, knowing, like, for people that use aliases, like, knowing, their name, asking them, how do you want me to refer to you? I mean, just, like, the tiniest things, like, lets someone know, especially people that have endured a lot of trauma, and have been silenced, or, have felt like they just don't matter. And there were a lot of people that I felt like I was meeting them in that place. it was just like sort of entering with like basic respect. And you would be surprised like how many people, especially because this is such a hot story, you know, for lack of a better term, like how many journalists, right? Like these people had cycled through and were just totally disrespected, you know, with people like not knowing how to pronounce their name right. Just basic stuff, you know, or not knowing anything about their music career or like things that actually, you know, that they were proud of or anything about their journey. You know, people were just like, let's get to the meat of like what happened between you and Sean Combs. And that has never been my approach, like ever, even predating, you know, this series. And so, but it became even more important then. And then when I would sort of get that first conversation, you know, I would do like a very basic overview, you know, asking them like, hey, do you want to hear like what my take is? Here's a little bit about me, just so you know, some past works. And here's, you know, so I'm just not like this rando person, you know, I'm not working for Sean Combs. That was a big, like a very big fear. But like, yeah, like, here's my overview of like what I'm thinking. And here's sort of like what would be really interesting to hear from you. And I never led with like potential trauma, you know, in that I led with, and it was very true for the series. To me, I wanted to understand like what was the goal? You know, I mean, a lot of these people are artists, right? And so it's like, well, what did you want? Like, what were your dreams, you know, before all of this happened? I wanted to really understand that. And I also wanted to understand, like, what was it about Sean that you know, that you were attracted to? You know, why did you want to go work at Bad Boy? Like, what was that like? Because I felt, or I still feel, like people, especially victims of sexual assault, you know, people are just sort of, you know, there's like the things that we've all heard before, right? Like, well, you knew what you were getting into, or, you know, if that's what you're, you know, if you're going to roll like that, you know, like you can't expect anything different, or you just all the really ignorant things that people say, like blaming the victim instead of the perpetrator. And I thought that like I wanted to capture the story so that people, an audience, would be able to recognize like, oh, that's my daughter's like that, or my niece or nephew are like that, or this reminds me of my sister, or this reminds me of my mother. Like wherever, you know, your entry point is, that these are just human beings trying to like make something of themselves in their lives, you know, and no one was like seeking for the trauma to come to them. And through the relationship or them entering into Sean's world, there was a lot of manipulation. And I felt like, you know, when you're young and you're new to New York City, or you're a young guy who just, you know, who wants to like go straight, and, you know, maybe you want to flip your career and you want to become, you know, an artist, or you want to own a record label, you know, and you don't want to do street shit, whatever it is, whatever the story is, like we all are susceptible to people that, you know, might take advantage of us. And I wanted to make that relatable. I wanted their experiences to be relatable. So a lot of the conversations were talking about that type of stuff, and that would take hours and hours and hours. And then, you know, if it felt right, we would segue to like what happened. But that didn't, you know, there's people in the series that I actually got into the interview and they never told me like what actually happened. And that was okay, you know?
Yeah. I love it. You said she doesn't want to share the details, so we won't get into the details. And I think there's this like fear around this, or this old way of doing things, like these I got you moments, and it doesn't make for a better film, in my opinion. Like I felt that nuance. I felt the complexity of those stories. We call that, you know, we have a little company, we call it our North Star, and establishing that basically unwritten agreement between you and your participant. Like, okay, well, this is what I'm thinking. What are you thinking? And those conversations do take hours, but that's the story. That's really the meat of it. And like, I think that's when I watch this, it's a story that we all know and we've all heard 1,000 times, but but never heard before. And that's what's so extraordinary about it. And there's just times where you feel your closeness. And it's just, it's extraordinary. So the time that you took really comes through and is so admirable. So in establishing that, this is all before no cameras.
Yeah.
No cameras, right? And
No
I think
cameras.
that's something that, you know, we're expected to go in with the camera, get what we have, like, you know, and I know that we're on this schedule. I'd also love to hear about your interview process. It's a bit of an unusual interview process. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that and then how we can get there.
Well, you know, I didn't realize that my process was so unusual until the editors were being interviewed, and I mean, I had 7 editors, not always working at the same time, but over the course of this series, and I would say half of them I had worked with before, but they never shared this with me, that I shoot really long interviews. And sometimes it's multiple days. I would say on average, the shortest interview, I mean, especially on this series that I shot, was probably 5 hours, 5 or 6 hours. You know, I am a big, I'm a really, really big believer in, because I wanted to get so much context and I wanted to understand so much about their world and, you know, them taking you back in time and setting the stage. I like to get every little detail, you know, and I love anecdotes. Like I love when interview subjects don't necessarily when they can just give you as much detail as possible, and I want to allow space and time for that. And you know, sometimes during shooting, we would just stay in the very, very early years of their life, and then it's like a day has gone by, and I, you know, we have so much more to go, and I tell everybody, like, look, this can go as long as you want it to go, but I didn't want anyone to feel rushed, and I think what made this sort of like a special experience, what made it sort of a special experience was that so many of the people that I was in communication with and that participated in the series, it's like they were waiting for someone to talk to them, you know, like in like with Kirk Burroughs, for example, I feel like it was like decades of him wanting to just finally, like, let me tell you the whole thing of what happened, because so many of them had just been, you know, outcast and sort of ridiculed even, you know. Kirk was on like the radio and you know, on different, like in just different places, it very publicly was like laughed at, you know, during his first lawsuit, you know, that his first allegations against Sean, when those went public. And so just for them to know that just for them to know that, like, I'm here and we have as much time as needed, you know, to get through this, was sort of like the process of how the shoots went.
So you're in these interviews, and how, I mean, you don't know where they're going to go. What kind of precautions do you guys have in place if anything, you know, gets too intense? Crew, participant, how do you guys, because you're digging up a lot of stuff, and I know that can be really emotional. Breaks, how do you structure those days?
Well, with all of, you know, I'm so sorry. I'm in a hotel room, everyone, and there's someone who just keeps knocking at my door. But I'm gonna.
You can go. Do you want to just?
Yeah, just give me a second.
Yeah,
it's
keep going.
Incessant. Yeah. Sorry.
Make sure it's not an emergency.
Yeah. Sorry.
No worries at all.
Everyone see my my slippers. So
at least you have pants on.
Yeah, exactly. I did have to think about that before I got
yeah.
But yeah, so sorry, I just lost my train of thought. What were the precautions, or what were things that we took,
put in place to
So there were a lot of different measures that were taken that were different about this. I guess starting with just information about what we were doing on a day-to-day basis. No one knew what we were shooting. The crew, unless it was really just like the DP, my producer, myself, we were the only core team that like knew who was going to show up to set that day. The rest of the crew, like, you know, additional, like the ACs and gaffers grips, like they didn't have any information. We had security every day. And even then it was like in the morning we would share, you know, like who was coming to set, the locations where, you know, if we were on location, we would make sure that like no one was in the room. So the us being able to move around, you know, especially in New York, was like, it was very controlled. We didn't have call sheets. So there was no one even at Netflix that could just like go into the system and figure out like where was this project shooting and like who were they shooting. All of that information was completely confidential. And we had our production coordinator was sort of like the air traffic controller, right? So everyone on the crew had one person's number for, you know, in an emergency. And there's probably like two people, but like it was it was sort of designed to not be this open experience. And then with the participants, no, my producer, who she was the only person that would ever speak to a participant besides myself, because I didn't want to overwhelm, you know, any of the participants with like, well, okay, now you've talked to me, now I'm going to pass you to this person, and then you're going to get passed to this person for your car service. It was just the two of us. We did everything. And it was impossible for me to do it all by myself, but my supervising producer, co-producer, Vanessa Sanchez, who's amazing, was the only other human that anyone else could talk to. And so she, when it came to travel, flights, all of that, she was the only person that knew that these people were traveling to us or where they were going. And I mean, these were all precautions that like every person that we filmed with pretty much was like, if they didn't ask for it to begin with, they were so thankful. And I think that also sort of like, you know, just like calmed everyone down. So they arrived to set knowing that like everything is confidential. We did have some days where subjects were overwhelmed and didn't get on the plane, you know, or we knew that they had made it to the city we were in, but they didn't show up to set. So we had one instance where somebody actually had an emergency. I think she had a lot of stress and she had like an emergency, like she had to go to the ER and she had surgery, like in the middle of the night. And I went to the hospital. I mean, it was like so intense. But in every single case, we made sure, like, you know, we'd do a wellness check if we didn't hear from anyone or someone. You know, there's a line, I think, of not imposing care for people, you know, versus them. But we were pretty lucky with most cases where there was sort of like like the participant needed help, that they already had people that they could call, that we would take care, we would bring them.
Making sure that it's in place.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, so that we were really, we were very fortunate to have that. So we, I mean, there were different situations. And then on set, everything, you know, if the participant showed up, everything was okay. I'm also a big believer in not rushing to start rolling. I'm very slow. I take my time. So even on set, I am like, all right, are you hungry? You know, let's talk a little bit. Like, let's just, because I wanted to feel them out. I want to, sometimes it's me meeting them for the very first time and
Oh.
our energies just like, you know, merging or whatever. And so I take my time, and if I feel like, you know what, it's just like sort of a gut instinct. Like, I don't think that they're ready for me to bring them over to the camera yet.
Yeah.
I'm just going to keep.
I think you called it a vibe, which I love.
Yeah.
The vibe. I was like,
vibe.
So much of it in that is a vibe. And yeah, I love that. I'm like, yeah, it's a vibe. You kind of just, it's no, and you also in my deep dive of everything, Alex, you were talking about how like sometimes people just need a meal.
Yeah.
And like, picking up on that, and like you know, we get so like worked up and like we need to get in and we're on everybody's time and we're trying, but like sometimes you just need to bread.
Sometimes like that's what's needed. And it's like, you know, okay, we weren't able to do this before, but we'll do it now. And then we'll get into it, you know. I mean, that's what I fought for with a partner like Netflix. I was like, if we're going to do this, like, we can't have regular date, you know, there's you know, some circumstances where I'm going to just need more time and the resources to not put pressure on these participants. And so we were very fortunate and very lucky to do that. And, you know, and then when an interview would start, so, you know, in getting to the stickier places and the more uncomfortable conversations, you know, sometimes it's just like the art of directing, like knowing like, okay, but you know what, let's do a reset. I know that they're a smoker. Let me like, let them go outside and take a break before we get into that. Or, you know, the location, oh my gosh, like the location's being noisy or whatever. If there was a distraction, like, let that die out. You know, making sure that the cards are like stocked before you start, like, I mean, basic thing like that. Like, don't start big conversations when you have 10 minutes left on a card, you know, it's like the worst. I always tell interview subjects and participants, like, this is what happens with cards. I might have to cut you off.
Over-explain everything.
Yes. Everything. And who people are, you know, and once I start filming, it's a really big rule of mine that I've also had for a very long time, but especially on The Reckoning, I clear everyone off of the set.
Yeah.
And sometimes, if need be, I'll even use blacks to cover me and or my DP, so that if I know that person just doesn't want to even see, they don't want to make eye contact, because that happens, I will black.
Is that part of the vibe, or is that a discussion that you have with?
It's a discussion, or sometimes it's like, that's a part of like me reading them out. I don't necessarily offer that. I do cocoon my sets. So with sound, I never allow, I don't want any participant to have any human being in their eye line except for me and maybe to see my DP. Even for sound, I always black them off. I always put up a little, you know, curtain for them. And I also try to cocoon my sets so that they just feel like, you know, even if we're in a really big location, like, I want it to feel like it's just us, you know, so that they can forget all this gear and lights and
all the people, all these strangers staring at them.
I mean, they're out. Like, they don't. They're not even
the normal setup, right? It's just all the people around, everyone looking at you.
No, I there's nothing that irritates me more than and I love my crew because they're amazing, but we didn't bring people here to have uncomfortable conversations. It's respect, you know, like they should feel like they're pouring their soul out to, you know, 20 people IRL, you know, it's already a big deal that this is going to go public, you know.
Right. You touched on this, and I'd love to just talk about this more, but the importance of partners. Netflix was your partner in this, like, because a lot of this stuff, you know, especially for, you know, when you're coming up, it sounds really great, right? But how do you make it happen in real life, right? Talk to me about where Netflix came in the process, and how you set up that relationship. I find that a lot of these things are better off said right out of the gate, so everyone knows and is on the same page, much like our relationship with our crew, our relationship with our participant. The same relationship or the same North Star discussion has to happen with your partner in this sense. So walk me through that.
So, I've worked for Netflix for many years. I've done some other complicated projects in the past. So I was in touch with them that first day.
Oh, okay.
And it was sort of like, just, it wasn't like a, hey, let's go make this, but they knew that I was working on something. And so that happened very early on. And then I continued to develop. I mean, I went back into my after doing a lot of research, and I always write out treatments. For this one, it was like, I knew I was really obsessed with trying to dig into Sean's origin story as much as possible. And so a lot of work went into that. And so when I had something sort of baked, I came back and, 50 Cent is also an EP on this project. And I've also known him for a very, very, a while. We were actually working on something. We were in the middle of doing something else when all of this broke. And he, we were doing something completely different. He was posting that he was going to do a doc. And so we sort of had a conversation, and I was like, well, I'm sort of working on this. And he's like, I'm doing this. And I was like, well, are you down to collaborate on this? Because I knew that, going back to participant trust, I knew that 50, and I mean, he knew this, but this is what, I can't speak to why he wanted to work with me. I can only speak to why I wanted to work with him. And I think that it was such a crazy world before the indictment. No one knew what was going to happen, were these just going to be allegations, but then Sean was going to be on the streets, was he going to threaten everyone? Was he, what was going to happen? And 50 sort of provided a way for a lot of participants to actually feel safe. If they spoke to me or to him, it's like, okay, this is not in vain. Yeah. This is a project that is, being made, that it's going to be authentic, because that's another level of, that's not necessarily about trauma, but when you pour your heart out about something and then no one understands the nuances of what you're talking about. I mean, that happened in the trial with even Capricorn Clark, that was a big part of the trust too, which was I'm going to talk to Alex, and because of this team that is there, they're going to understand the stuff that I'm saying. I'm not going to have to over explain myself or defend, things about the culture that I come from, of why this would even be normal. Right. All of that was so necessary, and really meant a lot to everyone participating. So, with Netflix, I mean, we got offers to go to other places, that, would have given me bigger budgets. And I said no, because I'm a big, first producer I ever worked for, Carrie Woods, told me not all money is good money. And I swear by those words. And I feel especially with documentaries, we don't have the biggest budgets to begin with. And so it's very enticing sometimes to be like, oh, if I could squeeze more shoot days out of, if I had this, or I could get more archival or whatever it is. And I said, no, I'm not going to make it anywhere else, because Netflix is not attached to corporations that are compromised because of the man and all of the tentacles that he had everywhere. And that was a safety thing for me, everyone working and participating in this series. And Netflix, we had an understanding, they were not going to put me on a conveyor belt, and I was like, this is an old-fashioned documentary. You're not gonna all right, let's get this out, in 6 months. And I feel so many other all the other projects, were were just like hustling, getting it out. I mean, every other major series about Sean Combs came out before the trial even started.
Right.
So, yeah, so we took less resources, but we had more time. And when we had executives at Netflix, very small team, who really cared. And when I would come to them and I would be like, I can't tell you that. I can't share that information with you right now. Or like everyone says I have like the bat phone, like the way I communicate. I mean, so we had a whole operation and they're like, Alex is calling on the bat phone. It's like, no, everything was taken very serious. And even my safety, my crew's safety, the participants' safety, Netflix took it very seriously, every step of the way, even through today, and that's continuing to talk about this series. So that partnership, that the film could not have been done anywhere else.
Yeah, it is possible. I think that, we're always in a bit of a, kind of like a limbo with our distributors. But I think if you do it early enough and aren't afraid of those conversations and have some ideas, and that's why these conversations I feel are so important. Because if you go in being like, I know this can be done. I've seen it done A, B, and C. I know this is what's important. I know, I do think that there are some people who really understand the importance of whether it's safety and time. How did those conversations go with your crew when you're like, you might be shooting for 12 hours today?
Well, we have overtime.
Okay.
We never did like crazy day. We would just go back for another day if we didn't finish. But we break for lunch on time. We had very few meal penalties that ran more than 15 minutes. But the crew on this series was incredible. Right. They were so incredible. Like, I'm like a big stickler for sound mixers, and like I have to be, I think in docs, it's kind of one of the most important positions.
1,000%. Right? They hear everything. They're just that person. They're like, you're connected. I couldn't agree more. That's usually the person I go see first in the morning. And I'm like, here's what's happening. Here's what I need you to do. We need to speak eye language to each other, because I'm going to let you know when it's time to go introduce yourself, Yeah. And also just the idea of like, for people, even who I bring on to mic, another person, I think it's such a personal interaction, because that person is placing something on another person's body, and mm-hmm.
And especially in this world,
especially when you bring culture into it, or if you're working with minors, you have to think about all of that. And again, it seems so obvious, but for us, it was always a conversation. Yeah. What do you feel comfortable with? Like, where do you feel comfortable where your mic is? Do you want someone to put it on? Do you want me to put it on? Or is it okay if our sound person puts it on?
Right.
I want to go back to the sound. I feel like, just like really great, like the tea, right? Like the sound person. I couldn't agree more about like really just that's your connection constantly. And those, my sound person, I use this pretty much the same sound person, but he is the one who's still in touch with all of the participants. They love him so much. It is like, he's so important. And I don't think that, I think a lot of times we just get in this habit of, we'll get local. We'll just get local. And
right.
Don't think about the importance of having the same sound person throughout. Yeah,
absolutely. I have a few people that I work with, and depending, like, in New York, especially, and even when if they have to replace themselves, that's a big deal. It's like, yeah, who's showing up? Because it's, if you're just doing like a regular interview or a regular day, even things like, oh, them interrupting and be like, hold on, hear a plane. Like, that's like kind of not acceptable to me, you know, like I never want someone to be in the middle of talking, because the sound person is doing their job, you know, and they're just trying to make sure that you have pristine audio. And my job is like, I don't care if I hear a helicopter in this moment.
Yeah.
It is what it is. You know what I mean? Like, as long as I can hear the who's mic'd, if it has something in it that's like roughed it up a little bit, we'll figure it out, especially now with like technology. But and if there is an issue, I usually have like a diagram of my set where I can make eye contact with them. So even if they're, you know, blocked off, we can see each other, so I can turn and they can just like, you know, we got to stop it. And then I would find the natural breaking point, you know. And sometimes like there's interruptions over things that I actually don't need, you know, like I know like, oh, this is something that, because I'm always cutting in my head. And I feel like if you don't have that dance and that choreographed like rhythm with your sound person, it can really mess up an energy and the vibe, you know, of set. And so yeah, it's like, it's really, it's funny. Well, it's not funny. It's not funny at all. It's just funny, like that it happened on this day. Ironic is the word I'm looking for. When Aubrey O'Day filmed, when we finally sat down for her first interview, and I had spent months and months and months talking to her, and she had a pretty rough, you know, story, because she was also, you know, she had her story to tell, but then she also was dealing with, like, in light of all these accusations coming out, someone saying that they witnessed her being assaulted, and she didn't know if she just didn't have any memory of it. So she didn't want to say that the person was lying, but she also was, it was just very confusing for her. So we finally are filming, we're in Los Angeles, and it was the day of the fires in LA. And so there was like a fire truck and we were in West Hollywood. So all these fire trucks, and we didn't really understand what was happening, you know, like at all. But like, and the winds were the palm tree. I mean, it was like biblical,
yeah,
to be honest. Yeah. And I was like, okay, we took a break. And so for crew, then we figured out like, oh my gosh, there's fires breaking out. So anyone who wanted to leave was allowed to leave. For people that felt like that they weren't in harm's way, they stayed. People were sort of like pulling up into positions that they didn't really, but because she didn't want to go home. She didn't want to stop.
Yeah.
So I was like, are you sure? No, I want to keep going. She's like, also, I don't think we understood the gravity of like what was going down, but she didn't want to stop. And so that was like a perfect example of like, there was, you know, it got messy because of everything that was happening on the other side of that door, but she wanted to go. Yeah. And so we shot.
You got to. We have about 5 minutes. And so, I mean, I could talk to you for another hour about this, clearly. And I think that's why so many things. But now you have this 4-part series, and, you know, it's made such a huge splash. It's extraordinary. It comes out, and now you have your participants. What is your process once the series has been released? How do you check back in with them? How do you offer them support? How do you, again, I find it, a lot of it's communication. What does your process look like?
For this series, it still really is kept to myself and Vanessa are the only 2 people that still really communicate with everyone. I don't, you know, unless the participant is like, I want to meet so-and-so, which hasn't really happened. Like, sure. We don't want to overwhelm them with, you know, the project coming out. I mean, when we get closer, or in getting, everyone was in pretty much constant communication with myself and Vanessa, like all throughout post. I mean, there was a lot of like back and forth of, you know, just things to confirm, things to in the legal process. You know, there were 1,000 different little things that we would have to tie up, or getting more archival potentially. No one was ever I never shared anyone else that was in the project unless that person made themselves available, you know, unless two people already knew on their own that they were both in the series. So when as soon as I got the air date, I shared with everyone, like, look, just letting you know, it's going to come out, you know, in December. And I would let them know, like, we're only going to have a week. There's not going to be some big trailer and then, you know, a month. Like, it's going to happen real fast. So, you know, and just like a check-in with them. Like, are you good? Do you need anything? My cell is always on. And when the trailer dropped, there were a lot of phone calls. You know, some people were like excited. And then there were some phone calls of people that were like, I'm really nervous, Alex. You know, like, is this going to be okay? And I would share with them, like, this is the ground that we covered, you know. You know, there's no gotcha. I'm not a gotcha journalist. Like, there's no departure from, you know, what you shared. And I think it was more like not nervous about what they said, but just like how is this all going to play out, you know? And I do think that there was Sean being incarcerated probably was made things a little bit easier. I think people felt better that he was incarcerated when the film came out. And then when it came out, Vanessa, and I mean, I spoke to every single person, you know, that participated and was like, and I made myself available to them, you know. Some of them didn't want to talk. They like were just sitting in it for a couple of days, and then, you know, they're like, okay, I'm ready to communicate. All different types of feelings, I think, for everyone. With some people, it was like, if you would like to do press, you know, if you'd like to talk about it, I can put you in touch with people. But just also be careful while you're out there and what you say, because people. This is still a story where, you know, people are vultures and they prey upon, you know, they want more salacious details. And I would just kind of caution them to, like, even though this is out, just be careful who you talk to, and have stayed in touch. I you know, at this point, I try not to, I don't want to be overbearing with people that I feel like they've communicated to me, or they've given me some cues of, like, I don't think they want to keep being reminded, you know, about Sean Combs' The Reckoning, but every single person, and there were a few people that Vanessa was actually much closer to, and it felt more appropriate for her to kind of have that open. I felt like they felt more comfortable communicating with Vanessa, even more so than myself. I think everyone, it's been, I think maybe relief is the word that I think a lot of them had. And now the most beautiful thing is, like, a lot of them have found each other now that everyone knows, and it's more in the open. There's now this, like, some of the participants are sort of in their own community again, or people, they're like, oh, I always heard that person was actually like, I had it all twisted. I didn't even understand, you know, because Sean told me XYZ. And so it's been interesting to see. And some folks, you know, I mean, they all have my cell phone. So I'm always available.
Well, I mean, I think ultimately it can be such a healing, cathartic process, and that community that it spawns. You know, and we do the best we can, and I think you did better than that, and I think it comes through. I really do think it comes through in the series. So thank you so much. I know we're 2 minutes over. I'm going to be mindful of everybody's time, but Alex, truly, I'm such a fan of your work, and thank you for sharing your process. And, you know, again, I think these conversations are so important. So thank you.
Thank you for being so thoughtful. I'm obviously a huge fan of your work as well, and I hope it was valuable to you guys listening.
Me too.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.